So I came across the following Facebook comment, and I'd like to break this down for you today and explain my thoughts around it. So the comment is, overall calories are the only thing to watch out for. Maintain a slight calorie deficit and you're good to go. Now this comment, I think, probably well intentioned, but there's a great deal of information missing from this, and I want to go through this with you today, share my thoughts on what perhaps should be included and why it's quite a dangerous comment in some senses. So the first problem I feel is that it's quite an oversimplification of a problem that does exist for a lot of reasons for many different people. And it might really end up making people feel quite inadequate. It's like they've been thinking, I've been having to go at this fat loss thing, or weight loss as a lot of people incorrectly refer to it as. But they might be thinking, I've had to go at this many times or for an extended period of time, and it just isn't happening. And then this comment is saying, it's just this and it's just that, get on with it, essentially. So you might be left feeling a little bit inadequate, a bit demotivated, looking different directions as to which way do I turn, where's the advice, this guy must have it all figured out. So it's a little bit dangerous in that sense, that it might make people down tools and say, bugger it, I've had enough. And I think most importantly, sort of tip top there of the list, is that it misses out some crucial parts of a fat loss journey that must really be front and center, and we'll go through those during this episode, because we are really interested in sustainable fat loss. That is such an important point, is in order to be consistent over time, you have to have a sustainable approach that will support that consistency. One doesn't exist without the other. There's no mention of sustainability within that comment, and that's a crucial factor that it's missing. So the comment does mention overall calories, good start, and it does mention a slight deficit. Again, on the right lines, but let's dig a little deeper into the whole calorie and calorie deficit side of things. So the whole calorie deficit concept, so vast, so deep. There are many hours of discussion about this, and you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, it's fairly straightforward. A calorie is a calorie, and just eat less of it. And what else is there to talk about? I understand that, but just bear with me, and we'll have a look at some of the points to consider on top of all of that. So the actual concept of calorie deficit is one that is very complex, and it does need to be thoroughly understood to then be implemented into your daily life. And the implementation is yet another subject that is vast and varied. But the actual concept of getting the correct calorie deficit and then placing that into your life and then being able to sustain that and being able to commit to it and do it over a long-term basis, that's the challenge. Now, the comment mentions a slight calorie deficit. Now that's pretty vague. Maybe it's confusing. It might leave people saying, well, what is a slight calorie deficit? How on earth do you figure that out? Well, there is a sweet spot that we all want to hit, and even seasoned veterans don't always hit it, but sometimes they do. Most of the time they do. People that are just starting out, it's quite an exciting time, really, because you've got to go through a bit of experimentation in order to find out what that sweet spot is. And when you get it, it's a pretty sweet place to be, if you see what I did there. But along the way to actually getting to figure out what that sweet spot is, you learn so much. You learn so much about nutrition, you learn so much about yourself, you learn so much about food, and you learn so much about how it makes you feel, the hormonal regulation around it, your mood, your energy, tiredness, sleep, etc. It's such a wonderful journey to actually go on to get to that point that you originally thought was all that mattered. So the sweet spot is a very individual thing. No sweet spot is the same for two different people. So that is fascinating stuff, I find. But then the calorie deficit, if it's too large, then your body will refuse to cooperate, especially over the long term. It will rebel against what you're doing. You can't sustain a calorie deficit that is too aggressive. And by the same token, if it's too little or too less of, that's a better word, too less of, I'm even doubting that word now. But if you have a calorie deficit that is not sufficient, there we go, or go with that one, then you won't really get the goals that you want. But you'll have done the research and you'll have put in the effort to put it into your life, and you'll be going through the daily grind of eating the foods that you need to eat and the amounts that you need to eat them in, and all for what? Just the knowledge that you've done it without the results. So it's really important that we always gravitate to, or as close to, that sweet spot as we can in order to not fail. And by failure, I mean not losing weight or gaining it instead. Or maybe just losing it too slow to serve as motivation to yourself, so that it only lasts for a wee while until you revert back to the way that you perhaps know and that are comfortable, even though it frustrates you no end. So an aggressive calorie deficit is the worst possible situation. The fatigue that you get, you start losing sleep, you become a little bit irritable. Life is not great and you're always quite hungry, and for all the wrong reasons. So the important question is, how do you determine a calorie deficit, and how do you get to that sweet spot that we all want to achieve? So the very first step is actually understanding or establishing what your maintenance calories look like. It won't be a particular number, it'll be in the ballpark of a certain number. So don't get too tied to a specific number, because we all move in varied amounts during the day. We all do some more activity some days than we do others. So it is impossible to nail down a number, but you want to have a range whereby you're keeping to. And that range normally fluctuates by putting certain foods into your mouth some days and some others, because the differences in those that you'll have as part of your daily life will just keep within that range. So then you can be sure that you're going around saying, yes, 5-7 days a week has passed, I've eaten different foods, or maybe the same, throughout that week, and each day I have been within what I assume my maintenance range is. That's where you want to be. And once you have established that your weight has not really fluctuated much, because you have water weight to account for, which will go up and down every day, but you are there or thereabouts, and you feel as though you are pretty much the same. This is where you just have to really be careful with the scales, because when they go up and down, it can come with motivation or demotivation, and you've got to kind of tune that out and just think, how am I feeling, as well as what these scales are saying? What's my water intake been like? What's my activity levels been like? Have I been sweating? If it's warmer or more humid? All these factors. Is the scale showing you that you are there or thereabouts? And more importantly, if you have a way of measuring your body fat, has that stayed consistent regardless of what your weight is doing? Is your body keeping your body fat levels the same percentage or not? And that's a really good indication of if where you're currently at, you are staying the same and maintaining. Once you get to that stage, you can be quite confident that the foods that I'm eating, the quantity that I'm eating them in, there or thereabouts, is where I want to be, and this is now my maintenance level. So once you are happy or confident that what you're eating is indeed inside your maintenance zone, maintenance range, maintenance amount, call it what you like, that's when you take the next step of making the tweak to create that sweet spot of a deficit. Or at least we're going to try and then assess again later on. So 10 or 15% reduction from your maintenance calories, and usually from carbohydrates. That's a good place to start, keeping that protein and fats high. So take that off your diet, that 10, 15%, whatever you feel comfortable with, depends on what sort of mind frame that you're in. If you want to work up to 15% or start straight away and just see what happens, see how you feel, see how you react hormonally, see what your energy levels are like in the gym and so forth. But taking that 10 or 15% off will create that slight deficit that the comment relates to or mentions. Let's see what happens from that point on. And be under no illusion that this is the start, not the end point. You've created what you think is your slight deficit, and now you've got to fine tune as you go along. Keep a good eye on it. Keep an eye on your weight, keep an eye on your body fat percentage. Really have that internal feedback and how are you feeling? What's your strength? What's your energy? What's your sleep like? All these things contribute towards thinking, is that a good deficit? Or do I need to reduce it or increase it slightly? And again, evaluate what happens. And one thing that comment didn't say was about expectations and about longer term and what to expect and so forth. So when you are progressing with fat loss, it's not a linear process. Some days will be good, some days will be bad. You'll be sort of up and down if you were to draw it on a graph as to how your progress is going on a daily basis. And so expect that to go up and down. The key point is that you need to make sure you're consistent in what you're doing. Keep to the plan and then reevaluate later on. Don't feel a certain way one day and go, no, this isn't working. I'm going to drastically cut my calories because that's the only way to go, and then see what happens. Don't do that. Make sure that you're consistent over time, and especially because then you'll have something to track your progress with, something to give you tangible reasoning as to why you are or aren't going to do something. And that's really key in this process, and something else the comment didn't say. And as you get lighter as a result of being successful, of being in that sweet spot of a calorie deficit, and everything is going your way over the weeks and months, and you'll get lighter and lighter, of course, as you burn the body fat. And then your body is going to adapt to that because you now don't weigh as much and you don't have to carry things around with you. Body fat really. And the body will start to adapt and you will start burning fewer calories. Even if you've built a lot of muscle, if you've dropped a lot of body weight and your muscle has gone up a little bit, then you'll still be burning fewer calories because muscle doesn't contribute that much to your metabolism. It does over a long period of time as you build. But if we're looking at weeks and months, then it'll contribute a small amount, but it won't be so significant that it really has a big influencing factor in this particular part of the process. And the motivation that comes with all this, you're getting a wee bit lighter as you progress. Things are looking good, you're feeling great. That's when the motivation really kicks in. And you'll know about this if you've experienced it or if you are experiencing it now. Is that when that motivation really kicks in, so you're not really telling yourself, this is good. You're actually feeling it. You're waking up and it's like, yeah, this is good. Once you get to that stage, there's no stopping it. And so long as you keep to the plan with that motivation and do something every day that contributes towards more of this motivation, you'll be like a runaway freight train of fat loss. How's that for you? Put that on a t-shirt. And one other thing that the comment didn't mention, amongst many, is that of the actual calories that you're eating. The source of them, the quality of them, all pretty important. If you're creating a calorie deficit based on a diet of jelly babies and milk, just to mention a couple of things off the top of my head, you're not going to get very far. You're going to screw with your hormones and your body's going to rebel against you. To keep it nice and condensed there, put it into a nutshell, like that phrase. If you instead eat a meal or multiple meals a day that are wholesome foods, full of nutrients, pretty good for you, great protein sources, etc. Chicken, rice and peas, for example, maybe carrots, broccoli, potatoes, the good foods, massive difference there. And the macronutrient side of things is really important too. Something else the comments didn't say. So macronutrients, proteins, carbohydrates and fats, those are the three that we consume. Protein is essential for preserving muscle mass or helping to build it, we really want to include protein and prioritize and nurture the protein intake that we're taking. And then this deficit that we're building, that sweet spot we get into, that slight deficit that the comment mentioned, well, we'll take that away from carbohydrates mainly and try and keep the fats there because they're pretty good for your hormones and your energy, your hair, your fingers, your skin, all that kind of stuff. The carbohydrates are very important too, but we choose to cut those to create the deficit. We still have them and they still contribute entirely towards all that I've just mentioned, the hormones and the energy levels, etc. But they're the part of the diet that we can play with and manipulate. Always keeping that protein high though. So another point that the comment didn't mention, surprises that of tracking. We touched on it a wee bit earlier on, but it's really important to track what you're doing in order to have a reason to make a change, to justify a change, or a reason for doing what you're doing and maintaining that motivation. If you just do something for the hell of it, then depending on the kind of person that you are, you might be thinking, well, what am I doing here? What's the reason for it? And then your motivation starts to sink because you can't justify it. But if you think, no, I can see this has happened when I've been eating like this, so therefore I'm going to choose to do that. And that might be something like an extra 2.5 or 5% deficit from the maintenance level that you once experienced, and then see how that goes. And if it goes really well, then the motivation sticks around, or it might even ramp up a little bit higher again, and you get more success. That's what you want. Or because you tracked what you did in the first place, rather than treating it as guesswork. So how do you track? What does it all mean? I've got my notebook out and I've got my pen handy, but what am I writing down? And if you just asked that question, great question, which I'm sure you just did. So to answer that for you, is this comes down to weighing your food out. And you look at the labels and so forth that you have available to you. Or my mate Google tells you everything. So does my wife actually. So if you just look at those labels and compile what you're eating and then put it all together so that you have a track record of the amounts that you've been eating and you go forward with that amount, then you can look back on that and think, right, this is what I'm going to tweak and so forth. But the actual tracking part of it really involves getting to the nitty-gritty. And this is the starting point. Like, you will progress forward and that understanding will kind of become second nature to you. So if you are into tracking, then great, just keep doing it. But if it's the bane of your life and you really just can't stand doing it, do it at the start while, like I said at the beginning of this episode, while you're learning about the process. And all these new things come to light, and they might be highly interesting or they might be really dull, who knows. But if you can't tolerate them, do it during this learning period because it's a necessary thing to do, and then you'll be able to probably go forward without having to be so tight and rigid and tracking the way that you started off tracking. And to carry on from that point, at least at the very start, behaviour over perfection. That's a really important phrase, which the comment didn't mention, in that you want to make sure you're behaving in a certain way. You're tracking, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're tweaking, you're looking at results. All these things are how you're behaving in order to achieve what you're doing. If you wake up every day and you want to be perfect in every single aspect, you will probably fail, or you won't have the motivation, or you'll find a part of it that's just, that's not good enough, or I did X, but I meant to do Y and Z, or this could have been better, or in hindsight, I should have done that. That's all fine and well. Excellent that you've got that mentality. But make sure it's your behavior change at the beginning of this journey that is really crucial. The mindset, the behavior behind it, that is really important. And on that point, I've forgotten to say it again. We're quite deep into the podcast, but g'day, my name is Simon, and this is the Deep South Experiment podcast. Welcome if this is your first time, welcome back if it's not. You must have seen something before that you'd like to be here again, so great, good on you, and thank you very much. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, that's what I'd really ask for in terms of your support and to help make it grow. We focus here on fat loss, muscle building, and mindset. 3 crucial elements to this whole journey that must be focused on, really, or take center stage in order for results to be apparent. More about me and this channel is in the description below. But thank you very much for being here and for your support. Let's get back to it. So yes, fat loss is very much a marathon, not a sprint. And focus on the trend that you're having over time, not the daily successes, because sometimes daily successes will be there, other times they won't. But you've got to keep motivated, you've got to keep consistent. So look at how was my week, how was my month, not how has today been, was it perfect? And if it wasn't, then that's it. I'm getting a pizza, bugger it. It can't be like that. Make sure your behaviour is as it needs to be, and make sure you are trending over a period of time. That's where the success lies. So sustainability and long term, something that the comment didn't say. It's a bit of a trend of this podcast, isn't it? So prolonged calorie deficit. Now, a small deficit or a slight deficit, we ever heard that before? I think it might have been in the comment. So slight deficit is great because it helps sustainability, but it's not a long-term thing. Your body will react and adapt. Even though you're being smart about it and giving it a reason to keep going, it will tweak one day, it will discover what you're doing, and it will rebel. And that is one important point to keep in mind and plan for. And in order to plan, it can be as simple as planning a diet break. So for a week, you don't need to have a free-for-all and just eat whatever you want, but just come back to your maintenance level. When the body has been in a deficit for so long, it starts to develop an awareness of what you're doing, and your hormone profile starts to change. When you're back at maintenance and giving it the food that it wants and needs, then if the body had a voice, it might say something like, everything is okay after all. There those calories are. I've been missing those for so long. So grateful to have them back. So therefore, let's just carry on. And then when it gets that reassurance and it's in that part of, everything's okay again, then guess what you do? You put your deficit back into place again and encourage that fat loss to keep reoccurring. And that is the point of a diet break, and that is how you plan for a long-term success at this whole fat loss thing. I can hear the voices saying, what about my favourite foods? And even if you're not saying that, there'll be someone that is. And it's a good point. Is I can't eat my favourite foods, therefore this is not going to work for me. I understand. It's all good. So that's when you have your cheat meals. But your cheat meals, that's another subject entirely. But to keep it short, is that plan a conservative cheat. So one that isn't going to blow your calorie deficit out of the water and make the last week and a half, 2 weeks, just all gone to waste. Just if you like a particular food, just plan to have it, plan to enjoy it, plan not to be guilty or demotivated. Then once you've had it, just really appreciate it. Have some gratitude for that, gratitude for yourself in terms of how far you've come, gratitude for the food that you're eating that you really love and enjoy, and then move on. It's all about managing that favourite food of yours, not having too much of it, but having enough of it to help your motivation levels, help your hormone levels, and just help you carry on. Because you'd rather have it with a slight bit of damage to your results, rather than not having it at all, than finding yourself binging or stopping what you're doing. So always think about, how do you react to these foods? How much do you want them? How much do you need them? And then plan that accordingly as part of your dietary process. Just like you plan a dietary break for a week, how you go back up to maintenance. Every now and again, plan how you're going to have your favourite food. Simple as that. And I think addressing motivation is a really key point, something the comment didn't do. And what you've got to really consider here is that sometimes motivation wanes. Is that today you're just not feeling it and you just want to raid the cookie jar or the fridge or the pantry or go to your restaurant and splurge or whatever it is. And that's when discipline bridges this particular gap that you have between motivation you're feeling and where you need to be. And that discipline doesn't need to last all day, all week, all month. It's just that short time where you're figuring out how to get back on track. I mean, you might have had some personal news or you might have had something happen at work and you just think, ugh. And when that happens, that discipline steps in, keeps you elevated for the time that you need to sort yourself out. And that might be a good night's sleep. The next day you wake up and then you carry on. But just to be aware of that discipline will bridge that gap and have that awareness of what's happened to you in your life and everything's fine, it's not going to derail you, you just need to figure out a way to manage that and keep on track. And so going back to the adaptation side of things, is that the body over time is a remarkable tool and it will adapt to what you're doing. It generally becomes more efficient. So you'll be able to sustain the same things in life that you're doing with less need for body fat, so it probably won't burn as much. Or you'll become more efficient in the gym. Your muscles will become stronger, your respiratory system will become more efficient, and so forth. So therefore, it will cost you less to do the work that you're doing in the gym. And especially if you're getting lighter, then there's no need to burn as much throughout the day. So there's always this adaptation process that's occurring, and that's one thing that you really have to keep on top of and constantly go back and tweak what you're doing. And now this 10% calorie deficit, is it still a 10% calorie deficit? If you are weighing less than what you used to, is it 10%? Or is it now representative of a larger number? It's the danger of percentages rather than numbers here. So really always think that when you've had some kind of milestone that you have in your mind, 5, 10, 15 pounds or kilos or stones, whatever your measurement, then when you reach that, sit back and think, right, okay, let's have a look at this deficit here and make sure that I'm still in that sweet spot. Or if you find yourself drifting from your sweet spot, that's probably the reason why. You need to go back and have a look at what you've achieved, how you and your body has changed, and just simply make a small tweak and away you go again. And now might be a good time to break an interesting point to you, is that calories are generally wrong. Whatever you see on your packet, on your food label, probably isn't right. And now you're thinking, well, what the hell's the point of all this then? What numbers am I writing down in my journal? Because, you know, you're using a journal, aren't you? You're not using any electronic device. So whatever you're doing, the numbers you're writing down with your pen in your journal are wrong. So what does that actually mean for you? Well, it means that you don't really know what you're consuming. And it means that the calorie deficit that you're creating probably isn't what you think it is. And it means that your daily practice and what you're doing probably isn't what you think it is. But the question is, does that really matter? Because you've got to think of the calorie out side of things too. You can't be sure exactly how many calories that you're expending, be it sitting down watching the wrestling, just like everyone does, or Shortland Street here in New Zealand, fantastic soap. Or when you're wandering around the house doing DIY or doing the laundry or the dishes or vacuuming the floor 5, 6, 7 times a day, you just never know what amount of calories you're expending. So just like the out process is a mystery, the in process is also a mystery, just when we had it figured out. So what does all this mean? It means that we go back to the key point of behaviour rather than perfection. Is that You're getting a number down on paper that you think is correct, and then you're proceeding forward with that, and you're seeing what happens. And you're thinking whether this is 3,000 calories or whether it's 2,500 calories, it doesn't really matter because it's produced a result. And that result is either saying to you what you're currently doing, whether it's 3,000 or 2,500, this is maintenance. Or it's saying that this calorie deficit that you believe you've produced, this 10% reduction or 15% reduction you believe that you've produced, is resulting in this particular result on the scales or the body fat analysis. So you are doing well. So regardless of whether it's 500 calories either way that you believe you're consuming, your result is saying this is the result. So keep doing things wrong and keep getting the results that you need, because that's just the way that it works. You can't be 100% accurate or perfect in what you're eating, nor do you know what you're expending, be it in the gym, fidgeting, sleeping, sitting around at work, whatever it is that you do. You can never be sure of these numbers. The key is the approach, the sustainability, the motivation, and tracking the best that you possibly can. And then get all these things together and away you go. So the overall calories do matter. A slight deficit is what you need, but you can never know. You can just try and get it as perfectly imperfect as you can. So just the final thought then, let's pop the comment back on the screen and just have a wee summary here. So the overall calories are the only thing to look out for. Well, it's a starting point, but there are so many factors that go into that, as we've been throughout this episode. And it's a slight calorie deficit. Well, we can't ignore some of the essentials of fat loss, the whole picture that we've got to look at, and ignoring things like food quality, macronutrient balance, the mindset, the metabolic adaptations that will happen, that we have to account for and adapt to. The short-term thinking that this might perhaps make people think about or adopt is a surefire recipe for failure. And effective fat loss, well, it requires a holistic approach that prioritizes sustainability, health, long-term planning, not quick fixes. Right, so that's that then. Those are my comments on the comment. Feel free to comment below. Lots of comments all around. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.